Hello there, and welcome. Before we begin tonight's journey, I'd love to know where you are right now. Are you settled comfortably in bed? Perhaps with the lights dimmed low, or maybe you're somewhere else entirely, looking for a gentle companion as the day winds down. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, you're welcome here. Tonight, we're going to explore something that most people never think about when they picture ancient Egypt. We're not going to talk about pharaohs or golden treasures or the mysteries of mummification. No. Tonight, we're going to meet the people who actually built Egypt. The invisible ones. The forgotten millions whose hands shaped every stone, whose backs carried every burden, whose lives made everything else possible. If you enjoy this kind of calm, educational content that helps you unwind and perhaps drift peacefully towards sleep, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to the channel. And if at any point you find your mind wandering or your eyelids growing heavy, well, that's exactly what this is for. Now, take a deep breath with me. Let it out slowly. Good. Let's begin. Everyone knows about the pyramids of Egypt. Those massive triangular monuments rising from the desert sand, built thousands of years ago. Still standing today. We see them in photographs, in documentaries, in movies. They're iconic. They're magnificent. They're impossible to ignore. But there's another pyramid, one you can't see, one that never appears in the photographs. This pyramid was just as massive, just as carefully structured, just as essential to ancient Egypt, but it wasn't made of stone. It was made of people. Millions and millions of people, arranged in layers, each layer supporting the one above it, the whole structure holding up the tiny point at the very top. This is the social pyramid, the invisible pyramid, the structure that determined everything about your life if you were born in ancient Egypt, and tonight, we're going to explore it, not by climbing up toward the golden peak, but by descending down through the layers, down to the foundation, down to where most people actually lived. Because here's the thing about pyramids. The part you see, the gleaming limestone peak, that's the smallest part. The real mass, the real weight, the real substance of a pyramid is in the base, hidden, supporting everything, holding up the glory. Egypt was like that too. Let me take you back, way back, over 3,000 years back in time. Picture the ancient world. Bronze Age. No computers. Obviously, no electricity. No machinery as we'd understand it. But somehow, in this pre-modern world, a civilization arose that would last longer than any other. 3,000 years of continuous culture. 3,000 years of pharaohs and priests and monuments and art. America, by comparison, is not even 250 years old. Christianity is about 2,000 years old. Ancient Egypt lasted longer than the time between the birth of Christ and today. Think about that for a moment. Let that incredible span of time settle in your mind. And during all those centuries, during all those generations, Egypt was organized. Strictly, rigidly, carefully organized. Everyone had a place. Everyone knew their place. And everyone stayed in their place. At the very top of the social pyramid sat the pharaoh. Just one person. The living God on earth. Divine, untouchable, absolute. Just below him, a thin layer of viziers and high priests. Maybe a few dozen people. The pharaoh's voice in the world. His administrators. His connection to the people. Below them, another layer. Scribes and officials. Maybe a few thousand people. The educated elite. The ones who could read and write. Who kept the records. Who made the bureaucracy function. Below them, skilled craftsmen. tens of thousands of people. Stonemasons and carpenters and jewelers and painters. The ones who made the beautiful things, the ones whose hands created the art we still admire today. Below them, farmers, millions of them, the true backbone of Egypt. The ones who grew the grain that fed everyone else. The ones who worked the fields along the Nile, year after year, generation after generation. And at the very bottom, the foundation of the entire structure. Laborers and servants. Millions more. The ones who carried the heavy loads, who dug the canals, who hauled the stones, who did the back-breaking work that made everything else possible. And below even them, though we often forget to count them, slaves, captured in war, sold for debt, property, not people. Their numbers unknown because no one bothered to count carefully. The invisible beneath the invisible. This was the structure, rigid, unchanging, eternal, or so it seemed. If you were born the son of a farmer, you would be a farmer. Your children would be farmers. Your grandchildren would be farmers. Forever and ever, stretching into an endless future. If you were born the daughter of a servant, you would be a servant. Your daughters would be servants. There was no climbing the pyramid. There was no moving up. Your place was your place was your place. In America, we have this idea that's fundamental to who we are. Anyone can become anything. Work hard enough. Dream big enough. And you can rise from poverty to wealth. From unknown to famous. From the bottom to the top. We call it the American dream. We believe in it, even when the reality falls short. Ancient Egypt believed the exact opposite. Your birth determined your destiny. Your father's position determined your position. The idea of social mobility, of changing your station in life, wasn't just difficult. It was almost unthinkable. It was against the natural order of things. Against Ma'at. Against the way the universe was supposed to work. And yet, and here's the paradox we'll be exploring tonight. This rigid system lasted for 3,000 years. It fed millions. It created a stable civilization that built wonders. It worked in its own oppressive way. It worked for longer than any democratic system has ever existed. How, why, and what was it like to live inside this structure? Those are the questions we'll be answering tonight. Now, when we talk about the workers of ancient Egypt, we need to understand something important. These weren't just faceless masses. These weren't just anonymous laborers whose individual lives didn't matter. They were people, real people, with names, though most of those names are lost, with families, with hopes and fears and joys and sorrows. They woke up every morning to the same sun we see. They felt the same heat, the same hunger, the same tiredness. They loved their children. They argued with their spouses. They laughed with their friends. They worried about tomorrow. The invisible hands that built Egypt were human hands. Think about the Great Pyramid of Giza for a moment. 2,300,000 blocks of stone, each block weighing, on average, 2.5 tons. Some weighing as much as 15 tons. Lifted into place without modern machinery. Without metal tools stronger than copper. Without any of the technology we take for granted. How human hands. Thousands and thousands of human hands. Working for decades. Hauling. Lifting. Positioning. Smoothing. Day after day after day. Or think about the harvest. Egypt fed itself on wheat and barley grown in the Nile Valley. That grain didn't plant itself, didn't water itself, didn't harvest itself. Every seed was pressed into the earth by human hands. Every irrigation channel was dug by human labor. Every sheaf was cut and gathered and threshed by workers in the hot sun. The monuments we remember were built by workers we forgot. And here's something interesting. Something that makes ancient Egypt different from how we sometimes imagine it. We often think of the pyramids being built by slaves. Thousands of slaves. Whipped and starved. Forced to labor until they dropped. But that's not quite accurate. Most of the workers weren't slaves. Technically, they were free citizens of Egypt. They received payment, usually in the form of rations, bread and beer, and occasionally vegetables and oil. They had legal rights. They could own property. They could marry who they chose, at least within their social class. They had protections, of a sort, but they also couldn't leave, couldn't change professions, couldn't rise to a higher station, were subject to forced labor during certain seasons, could be beaten for disobedience, had no say in how the country was run. So were they free? Were they slaves? The honest answer is both, and neither. They existed in a state that we don't have a simple word for. Something between slavery and freedom. Something that had elements of both. This is what I mean by the sleepy structure. Not sleepy because it's boring. Sleepy because it was rhythmic, cyclical, unchanging, like breathing, like the beating of a heart, like sleep itself. Wake at dawn, work all day, eat your rations, sleep at dusk, repeat. Every day the same, every year the same, every generation the same. A rhythm so steady, so predictable, so eternal, that it became invisible. It became just the way things were, and there was comfort in that. Strangely enough, security. If you knew your place, if you accepted it, if you didn't fight against it, there was a kind of peace in the predictability. You knew what tomorrow would bring. You knew your role. You knew your purpose. The question is whether that peace was worth the price. Over the next hour or so, we're going to find out. We're going to descend the invisible pyramid, layer by layer, and see what life was really like at each level. In the next chapter, we'll walk through a single day with 3 different people. A scribe named Amenhotep, living in the middle layers of the pyramid. A stonemason named Keti, skilled but still doing physical labor. And a farmer named Nefret, at the foundation, holding everything up. We'll experience their mornings, their work, their struggles, their small joys. We'll feel the sun on their skin and the dust in their lungs, and understand what it meant to wake up every day knowing exactly where you stood in the grand structure. Then, in Chapter 3, we'll discover the complex truth about this system. The surprising rights that workers had, the devastating restrictions they faced, the strikes they organized. Yes, actual strikes. Labor organizing in ancient Egypt. The small rebellions. The ways they found meaning in predetermined lives. In Chapter 4, we'll meet specific individuals whose names somehow survived. The architect who rose from nothing. The scribe who recorded everything and became immortal by accident. The criminal stonemason. The unknown woman whose bones tell a story of suffering and love. And finally, in Chapter 5, we'll reflect on what all of this means. What the sleepy structure teaches us about dignity and labor and the trade-offs between freedom and security. What echoes still remain in our own world, and why. In the end, we owe these invisible workers our gratitude and our memory. So let's descend now, down the invisible pyramid, past the gold and the glory, down to where life was actually lived. The year is 1250 BCE. The place is Deir el-Medina, a village on the west bank of the Nile near Thebes. This is where the workers who built the tombs in the Valley of the Kings lived. We know more about this village than almost any other worker settlement because archaeologists have studied it extensively. We have their records, Their receipts, their letters, their court documents. We know them. Dawn is breaking over the limestone cliffs that surround the valley. The sky is shifting from deep purple to soft pink to pale blue. The first rays of sun are just touching the top of the cliffs. But the village below is still in shadow. Still cool. Still quiet. Smoke begins to rise from cooking fires. The smell of baking bread drifts through the narrow streets. A donkey brays. A child cries. A woman calls out to her neighbor. The village is waking up. And we're going to wake up with them. We're going to meet Amenhotep, who's stirring now in his small but solid house, mentally preparing for another day of recording numbers and settling disputes. Grateful for his education, but aware of the ceiling above him. We're going to meet Katie, who's already up, checking his tools, kissing his wife goodbye, beginning the long walk to the Valley of the Kings, where he'll spend the day in a dark tomb shaft, chiseling hieroglyphics that will last for eternity, even though no one will know his name. And we're going to meet Nefret, who's been awake since before the stars faded, already in the fields with her children, already bent over the irrigation channels, already working. Because for farmers, dawn is late, and rest is a luxury they can't afford. 3 lives, 1 structure, 1 day in ancient Egypt. By the time we've walked through their day, you'll understand. You'll see the invisible pyramid not as an abstract concept but as a lived reality. You'll feel the weight of it, the rhythm of it, the strange peace and the terrible cost of it. But that's for the next chapter. For now, let the images settle. The worker village waking in the shadow of the cliffs, the smoke rising, the day beginning, the sleepy structure stirring to life once more, as it has stirred every morning for thousands of years. Rest easy. Let ancient Egypt's rhythm lull you. Let the distant sound of hammers on stone and children's laughter and donkeys braying fade into a gentle background hum. And when you're ready, we'll continue. We'll walk beside these workers. We'll see through their eyes. We'll understand their world. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. If you're finding this relaxing, if it's helping you unwind, I'd be grateful if you'd leave a like on this video. And if you'd like more content like this, more deep dives into history told in a calm and soothing way, please do subscribe. For now, rest. Dream of ancient villages and limestone cliffs and the endless rhythm of work and rest and work and rest. Stretching back through the millennia. Sleep well. The sun is rising now over Deir el-Medina. The first thing you need to know about ancient Egypt is that the sun isn't just weather. It's a god, Ra, crossing the sky in his solar boat, bringing light and life. Every sunrise is a sacred event. Every dawn is a miracle. But for the workers waking in their mud brick houses, the sun is also something more practical. It's the beginning of the workday. It's the signal that rest is over and labor begins. It's the rhythm that governs everything. Let's start with Amenhotep. He wakes to the sound of his wife moving around their small house. The smell of bread baking. The soft rustle of linen as she wraps her dress. He lies there for just a moment, eyes still closed, savoring the last few seconds of rest. His house is modest but solid. Mud brick walls, thick enough to keep out the worst of the heat. A flat roof where the family sleeps on hot nights. 2 rooms, which is more than many have. A doorway covered with a reed mat for privacy. In the corner, a small household shrine to Thoth, the god of scribes and writing. This is the home of a man in the middle, not wealthy, not poor, comfortable. If you can call any life in ancient Egypt comfortable, Amenhotep sits up. His back aches slightly. He's in his 30s, which isn't old. But it's not young either. Most people don't live past 40. If they're lucky. He stretches, feeling his joints pop and settle. His wife, Merit, brings him water in a clay bowl. He washes his face and hands. A small morning ritual. The water is cool, drawn from the village well before dawn. It feels good against his skin. Their 2 children are still sleeping on their reed mats in the other room. A boy of 7 and a girl of 4. Amenhotep looks at them for a moment. The boy especially. In a few years, he'll need to begin his education if he's to follow his father as a scribe. Education is expensive. It requires paying a teacher, buying materials, time away from work that could bring in extra rations. But it's the only path forward. The only way to stay in the middle of the pyramid instead of sliding down toward the bottom. Merit has prepared breakfast. Bread, as always, some onions, a cup of beer, thin and nourishing. This is what most Egyptians eat most of the time. Bread and beer. Beer in ancient Egypt isn't like modern beer. It's thick, almost like liquid bread. Nutritious. Safe to drink because the brewing process kills the bacteria that makes Nile water dangerous. Amenhotep eats slowly. He's not rushing. Scribes don't have to rush. Not like farmers or laborers. That's part of the privilege of his position. He has time, but he's also aware, always aware, of how precarious this comfort is. His father was a scribe. That's why he became a scribe. You inherit your profession in Egypt, but if his son doesn't get educated, if something happens to Amenhotep, if he loses his position, the family could slip, could fall to a lower level, could lose everything that makes their life bearable. This anxiety is constant, quiet, like a low hum in the background of his thoughts. He finishes his meal, takes his writing kit from its special place on a shelf. The kit is his most valuable possession. A wooden palette with 2 wells for ink. One black, one red, several reed brushes, carefully trimmed and maintained. A small water jar. A leather pouch containing a few precious sheets of papyrus. This kit cost more than most families earn in months. It represents years of his father's savings. It's worth more than the house. He slings it over his shoulder, kisses Merit goodbye. She's already grinding grain for the evening bread. A task that will take hours. He touches his son's head gently as the boy sleeps. Then he steps out into the growing light. The village streets are narrow, winding between houses that all look similar. Mud brick walls, small windows, flat roofs. Neighbors are emerging, heading to their own work. He knows most of them by name. This is a small community, maybe 60 or 70 families, all connected to the royal tomb construction. He nods to a carpenter, exchanges a few words with another scribe, comments on the weather, which is the same as always. Hot, dry. Predictably, as he walks toward the temple where he works, keeping records of supplies and rations, he passes stonemasons heading the other direction. They're going to the Valley of the Kings. They'll be gone all day, working in the dark, breathing limestone dust. Returning exhausted, Amenhotep is grateful, deeply grateful, that he doesn't do that work, that his father taught him to read and write, that he can sit in the shade with a palette instead of kneeling in the dark with a chisel. But he also feels something else, a small knot of guilt, a sense that his comfort is built on their labor, that the pyramid holds him up, yes, but also holds others down. He pushes the thought away. This is how things are. This is how things have always been. This is Ma'at, the cosmic order. He arrives at the temple, enters through the massive stone gateway, begins his day of recording numbers. Bushels of grain delivered. Jars of oil distributed. Workers paid. Disputas logged. Everything counted. everything recorded. His hand moves across the papyrus in practice strokes. Hieroglyphics flowing from his brush like water. This is what he's trained to do. This is his value to the system. And today will be like yesterday. And tomorrow will be like today. And his son will sit here someday. If the gods are willing, doing the same work, recording the same numbers, holding the same position, this is the middle of the pyramid. Comfortable enough, but with a ceiling you can feel pressing down and a floor you're always afraid of falling through. Now let's meet Kedi. He woke earlier than Amenhotep, earlier than dawn. Actually, workers who have to walk far to their job sites wake in the dark. His house is smaller than the scribes. One room for him. His wife, their 3 children, and his brother's family. 7 people in a space the size of a modern bedroom. They sleep close together, bodies touching, sharing warmth in the winter and accepting the discomfort of it in the summer. Privacy is a luxury Katie doesn't have. He rises carefully, trying not to wake the children. His wife, Taya, is already up. She's always up first, starting the bread, preparing his food for the day, checking on the children who wake with coughs or crying. Kedi splashes water on his face from a shared basin. The water is dirty already. His brother used it first. But it's water, which is precious, so you don't waste it. He eats standing up, bread and beer, the same as everyone eats. His hands are already rough with calluses, his fingers stained with rock dust that never quite washes away. He's 30, but his body feels older. His shoulders ache constantly from the work. His knees protest when he kneels for long periods. This is the cost of skilled labor. You're valued. Yes. Your work is important. Yes. But your body pays the price. He checks his tools. Copper chisels in various sizes. Wooden mallets with heads wrapped in leather to deaden the sound. A measuring string. A plumb line. These tools are his livelihood. He maintains them constantly. Sharpens them regularly, protects them carefully. It kisses Taya quickly. She's already exhausted and the sun isn't even up yet. Between caring for children, grinding grain, making bread, fetching water, and a dozen other tasks. She works harder than he does. But her work is invisible, uncounted, unpaid. That's how it is for women. Especially poor women. Kedi joins the other stonemasons gathering at the edge of the village. Maybe 20 men, all heading to the same place. They walk together. A loose group, talking quietly, sharing gossip, making jokes, complaining about overseers. As workers have always complained about overseers in every time and every place. The walk to the Valley of the Kings takes about an hour. It's not a terrible walk. Not like some have. But it's over rough ground. Up and down hills. In heat that builds as the sun rises. By the time they arrive, they're already sweating. Already tired. And the work hasn't even begun. At the work site, an overseer checks their names against a list. This is important. If you don't show up, you don't get rations. Miss too many days and you can be punished. Beaten. Fined. Or worse. Water is distributed. Each man gets a ration for the day. It's never quite enough. But it's what's provided. Then they descend into the tomb. This particular tomb is being cut into the limestone cliff for a high official, not a pharaoh. Those are reserved for different crews. But someone important enough to afford a proper tomb in this prestigious location. The entrance is a vertical shaft, maybe 20 feet deep. They climb down on rope ladders. At the bottom, a horizontal corridor extends into the rock. This is where they work. The air down here is thick, hard to breathe. The stone dust hangs in the air, visible in the dim light of oil lamps. Every breath fills your lungs with it. Every cough brings it back up. After years of this work, many masons develop a chronic cough that never goes away. But this is the job. This is what skilled stonemasons do. Katie's specialty is carving hieroglyphics. He can't read them. He's not educated like Amenhotep, but he can copy them perfectly. An artist draws the symbols in red paint on the smoothed stone. Katie follows the lines with his chisel, cutting each symbol with precision and care. He works for hours, kneeling, his back bent, his arm moving in the same motion over and over. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of hammer on chisel. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythm of creation. Around him, other masons are cutting the corridor deeper, pulling out baskets of stone chips, smoothing walls, painting. Everyone has their role. They talk while they work, quietly, because sound echoes strangely in the tomb. But they talk about their families, about food, about the gods, about nothing in particular. The conversation helps pass the time, makes the work bearable. Katie takes pride in his work. He knows these hieroglyphics will last forever, long after he's gone, after his children are gone, after everyone he knows is dust. These symbols will remain. He can't read them, but they're beautiful. He made them beautiful. That's worth something. That has to be worth something. At midday, they break for food, climb back up to the surface for air and light, eat their rations, rest in whatever shade they can find, drink their water carefully, making it last. Katie's hands are shaking slightly. This happens. Hours of precise work with heavy tools. The muscles in his forearms are knotted. His fingers are going numb. He massages them, working the blood back into the tips, flexes them, tries to keep them limber. These hands are everything. Without them, he's nothing. Can't work, can't eat, can't support his family. The other masons are in similar states. Some worse. One older man, maybe 45, has hands that are twisted with arthritis. He can barely grip his tools anymore. Soon he won't be able to work at all. And then what? There's no retirement in ancient Egypt. No pension. No social security. You work until you can't work. And then you depend on your children to feed you. And if they can't or won't, you starve. That's the fear that lives in the back of every worker's mind. The fear of becoming useless. After the break, they descend again. Back into the dark. Back to the dust. Back to the tap, tap, tap of hammers on stone. The afternoon is the same as the morning. The same motions. The same rhythm. The same hieroglyphics taking shape under his chisel. But there's a kind of meditation in it. A kind of peace. When you do the same thing for hours, your mind can wander. You think about other things while your hands work automatically. You remember better times. You imagine better futures. You exist somewhere between consciousness and dreaming. The sleepy structure. The rhythm that carries you through. Now let's meet Nefret. She's been awake longer than either of the men. Farmers wake before dawn because that's when you can work before the heat becomes unbearable. Nefret doesn't have a house in the village. She and her family live at the edge of their field, in a structure that's barely more than a reed shelter. Walls woven from papyrus stems, a roof of palm fronds, a floor of packed earth. This is the reality at the bottom of the pyramid. Even shelter is precarious. She shares this space with her husband, Abba, and their 3 children. The youngest is 5. The oldest is 11. All of them work. Even the 5-year-old has tasks. Gathering dung for fuel, chasing birds from the grain, Carrying water. In ancient Egypt, childhood, as we understand it, doesn't exist. Not for poor families. You're useful or you're a burden. Children become useful as early as possible. Nefret's day started while the stars were still visible. She walked to the irrigation channel to check the water level. This is crucial work. The fields need constant watering. Too much, and crops rot. Too little, and they die. The Nile's yearly flood, the inundation, waters the fields naturally. But for the rest of the year, farmers must irrigate manually. This means channels, dams, constantly moving water from the river to the fields. It's backbreaking labor. By the time the sun rises, Nefret has already been working for hours. Her back aches. Her feet are cracked and bleeding from walking barefoot on dried mud and stubble. Her hands are raw from handling ropes and tools. She's 28 years old. She looks 45. The family eats together in the field. They don't go home for meals. Home is too far. Time is too precious. They eat what they brought. Bread. Of course. Some dried fish, which is a luxury. Onions. Water from the channel, which isn't clean, but it's what they have. The children eat quickly and return to work. Weeding. Pulling out stones. Checking plants. Agriculture is not one task. It's 1,000 small tasks. All essential. All time-consuming. Nefret's husband, Abba, is repairing a dam. The mud brick structure that holds back water so it can be directed where it's needed. The bricks are heavy. The mud is slippery. The sun is hot. His back is crisscrossed with scars. Not from accidents. From beatings? When the harvest falls short. When the quota isn't met. Someone has to be blamed. Usually it's the farmers themselves. The overseers come with sticks. They beat you to encourage harder work, to establish dominance, to remind you of your place. This isn't considered cruel. It's considered normal. This is how you manage agricultural workers. This is how it's always been done. Abba doesn't complain. Complaining makes it worse. You endure. You survive. That's all. The midday heat is crushing. The temperature rises above 100 degrees. There's no shade in the fields. The sun beats down on your head, your shoulders, your back. Sweat pours off you. And you drink and drink, but you're always thirsty. Some days, people collapse. From heat, from exhaustion, from both. If you're lucky, someone helps you to shade and water. If you're not lucky, you die there in the field. This has happened. This will happen again. Nefret works through the heat. She has no choice. The growing season is short. The work is urgent. Stop working and your family doesn't eat. It's that simple. She thinks about her daughter while she works. The girl is 11 now. Soon she'll be married off to another farmer's son. That's the only future available to her. Farmers' daughters become farmers' wives. They work these same fields. Bear children who will work these same fields. To young, like everyone else. There's no way out. No ladder to climb. This is the foundation of the pyramid. The base, the bottom, and the bottom doesn't rise. But still, Nefret has her small hopes. Maybe this harvest will be good. Maybe the Nile will be generous. Maybe the overseers will be satisfied. Maybe her family will have enough to eat. Enough to be comfortable. For a little while. That's the hope. Just enough. Just survival. Just one more day. As the afternoon wears on, the three lives continue in parallel. Amenhotep sits in the shade of the temple. His brush moving across papyrus, recording numbers that represent people's survival. Grain allocated. Workers paid. Everything balanced. His shoulders ache slightly from sitting. His eyes ache from focusing. But this is comfortable work. Safe work. He'll go home to his house, to his family, to his relative comfort. He's grateful. But the gratitude feels complicated. Kedi kneels in the dark tomb. Hammer striking chisel. Chisel cutting stone. Hieroglyphics taking shape. His lungs are full of dust. His hands are numb. His knees are screaming. But the work is good work. Skilled work. Work that will last forever. Even if his name won't. He's proud. But the pride comes with pain. Nefret bends in the field. Her hands in the soil. Her back to the sun. Her children working beside her. Her body is breaking down. She knows this. She can feel it. But she doesn't stop. Can't stop. This is what you do. This is who you are. You work until you can't work anymore. And then you die. And your children take your place. She endures. Because that's all there is. 3 lives. 3 levels of the pyramid. All essential. All trapped. All finding meaning. Or trying to. In the rhythm of their days. As the sun begins to descend toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the work continues. But it's winding down. The day is ending. Soon, the workers will return home. Or to what passes for home. And rest will come. Brief rest. Because tomorrow, the same sun will rise. The same work will begin. The same rhythm will continue. The sleepy structure, holding everyone in place. Breathing in and out like a living thing. Amenhotep leaves the temple as shadows lengthen. The walk home is pleasant. He's not exhausted. He's tired. But it's a comfortable tiredness. The tiredness of mental work. Not physical collapse. His children run to meet him as he approaches his house. They're excited to see him. He gives them each a small fig he saved from his rations. A treat. A moment of sweetness in the routine. Merit has dinner ready. More bread. Of course. But also a stew with lentils and vegetables. The family eats together. Sitting in their small courtyard as the heat of the day finally breaks. After dinner, Amenhotep spends time with his son, teaching him 1 hieroglyph tonight. Just 1. The symbol for water. He draws it in the dirt with a stick. Makes the boy copy it. Again. Again. Until it's correct. This is the investment. This is how you maintain your place in the middle. By passing the knowledge down. By making sure your children can do what you do. When the stars come out, the family prepares for sleep. Tomorrow will be the same as today. And that's not such a bad thing. Stability. Predictability. Enough food. Enough shelter. The middle of the pyramid. It could be worse. Katie limps home after the long walk from the valley. His foot is swollen. A stone fell on it this afternoon. Not a big stone. But enough to bruise badly. Enough to make walking painful. Taya is waiting. She's been working all day too. But she stops to tend to him. Washes his foot. Wraps it in cloth. Gives him the last of the beer. The children are already asleep. Crowded together on their mats. They look peaceful. Innocent. Kedi watches them for a moment. Feeling something complicated. Love? Yes. But also dread. Because their futures are already written. His sons will be stonemasons. His daughter will marry a stonemason. The cycle continues. He eats cold bread because there's no time to make fresh at this hour. His hands are still trembling from the day's work. His shoulders are tight with pain. Tomorrow, he'll go back to the tomb. Back to the dark. Back to the dust. Back to the tap-tap-tap of his hammer. But tonight, for a few hours, he can rest. He lies down beside Taya, closes his eyes. Let's exhaustion pull him under. Sleep comes quickly when your body is this tired. Deep, dreamless sleep. The sleep of someone who has nothing left to give. Nefret doesn't go home because she is home. The field is home. The reed shelter at the field's edge. The children are already asleep when the last light fades. They collapsed from exhaustion, which is normal. Abba sits beside the shelter, staring at nothing. He's too tired to talk, too tired to think. Nefret lies down on the hard ground. There's no mat, no cushion, just earth. But she's so tired it doesn't matter. Her body is beyond pain now, beyond feeling, just numb. She looks up at the stars, the same stars that shine on the pharaoh in his palace, on the scribe in his house, on the mason in his room. The same stars that have watched Egypt for thousands of years. Tomorrow she'll wake before they fade. She'll work until she can't stand. She'll push her body beyond its limits because that's what survival requires. This is the foundation. This is the base of the pyramid. This is what everything else rests on. And tomorrow will be exactly the same. And the day after, and the day after that. Forever. The sleepy structure settling in for the night. All 3 levels. All necessary. All trapped. All resting briefly before the rhythm begins again. Wake. Work. Sleep. Repeat. For 3,000 years. Now we need to complicate the picture. Because history is never as simple as we'd like it to be. It's never just oppression or freedom. Never just suffering or joy. It's always both. Always contradictory. Always more nuanced than the stories we tell ourselves. The workers of ancient Egypt weren't simply slaves. But they weren't free either. They existed in a state that we struggle to categorize with our modern concepts. And understanding that complexity, sitting with that discomfort, that's where the real truth lives. So let's explore the paradox. Let's look at what rights these workers actually had. And then, let's look at the chains that bound them anyway. First, the surprising part. The part that doesn't fit the narrative of simple oppression. Most workers in ancient Egypt were not slaves. Not technically. They were free citizens of the kingdom. They had legal standing. They had protections under the law. They could own property. Enter contracts. Marry who they chose within their social class. This matters. It's not nothing. They were also paid for their work. Not in money. Because coined money didn't exist yet in Egypt. But in rations, grain, deer, oil, sometimes vegetables, occasionally meat during festivals. This was real compensation. It was guaranteed. If you worked, you received your rations. If you worked the required days, your family wouldn't starve. Let that sink in for a moment. Job security and food security. Guaranteed by the state. How many workers in the modern world have that? The ration system was sophisticated. Records survive showing exactly what workers received. 10 loaves of bread per day. 2 jugs of beer. A monthly allocation of oil. During major festivals, which happened frequently in Egypt, meat was distributed. Beef or poultry, depending on the importance of the festival. Compare this to workers in many other ancient civilizations, or frankly, to many workers throughout history, who had no such guarantees, who worked for whatever wages they could negotiate, who could be fired at will, who had no safety net if work disappeared. Egyptian workers had a contract, of sorts, an unwritten but universally understood contract. You work, the state feeds you. That's the deal. And they had legal recourse if the deal was broken. Court records survive from ancient Egypt, thousands of them. And in these records, we find something remarkable. We find workers suing their employers. We find craftsmen bringing cases against their supervisors. We find disputes being settled through legal process, not just through force. One papyrus records a carpenter who sued his overseer for withholding rations. The case went to court. Evidence was presented. Witnesses testified, and the carpenter won. The overseer was ordered to pay the back rations plus a fine. The worker won against his supervisor through legal means. This isn't what we expect from ancient autocratic societies, but it happened regularly enough that it wasn't even particularly noteworthy. Workers also had access to medical care. The state employed doctors. Worker villages had medical facilities. If you were injured on the job, you were treated. If you fell sick, you were cared for. There are records of sick days being granted and recorded. A stonemason breaks his arm while hauling a block. He's treated by a doctor, given time to heal, and continues to receive rations during his recovery. This is documented. This happened. More health care than many workers have in modern America, if we're being honest about it. And workers had time off, real time off. Not just the exhausted collapse at the end of each day, but actual holidays. The Egyptian calendar was full of festivals, religious celebrations dedicated to various gods. And during these festivals, work stopped. Everyone rested, feasted, celebrated. The state provided extra rations for festivals. Beer flowed. Meat was distributed. People dressed in their best clothes, painted their faces, sang and danced in the streets. Records suggest that about 1 day in every 10 was a rest day, plus major festivals, plus special occasions. Add it all up, and workers might have had as much as a third of the year off. More vacation time than the average American worker gets today. And then there's the strike. The famous strike of 1152 BCE. This is the first recorded labor strike in human history. And it happened in ancient Egypt. The workers at Deir el-Medina, the tomb builders, hadn't received their rations on time. This wasn't unusual. The system was complex, dependent on harvests and transportation and bureaucratic efficiency. Delays happened, but this time, the workers decided they'd had enough. They walked off the job. All of them. Just stopped working and marched to the administrative buildings. They sat down outside the temples and granaries, and they chanted. We have records of what they chanted. We are hungry. We are thirsty. We have no clothes. We have no ointment. We have no fish. We have no vegetables. A protest chant. 3,000 years ago. The officials tried to negotiate, promised the rations would come, but the workers didn't move. They stayed on strike. Day after day. A coordinated work stoppage. And here's the remarkable part. They won. The rations were delivered. The workers returned to their jobs. And there were no executions, no mass punishment, no brutal retaliation. The system bent, because the system needed them. This tells us something important. It tells us that even in a rigid hierarchy, even in an autocratic state, workers had leverage. Collective action worked. The state couldn't simply kill everyone and start over because skilled labor takes years to train. You can't just replace a master stonemason overnight. So there was negotiation. There was give and take. There was, in a very real sense, collective bargaining. Ancient Egypt had labor organizing before the concept of labor organizing existed. Americans like to think we invented workers' rights. We celebrate Labor Day. We honor the union movements of the 19th and 20th centuries. And those movements were important. Vital even. But Egyptian workers were striking in 1152 BCE. They were organizing collective action 3,000 years before the AFL-CIO. So that's the surprising part. The rights, the protections, The leverage that workers actually had, it complicates the simple story of oppression. It makes us think differently about what life was like inside the sleepy structure. But now comes the other side. The restrictions, the chains, the ways in which workers were absolutely, undeniably trapped. Because for all those rights, for all those protections, one fundamental fact remained. You couldn't leave. If you were born into a farming family, you were a farmer. For life, you couldn't decide one day that you'd rather be a scribe or a craftsman or a merchant. Your position was fixed. Your path was predetermined. Your destiny was inherited. This wasn't just cultural expectation. It was law. Workers were legally bound to their land, to their craft, to their position. Leaving without permission was a crime. Running away could result in severe punishment. We have records of workers who tried to escape, who fled to other provinces hoping to start over with new identities. Some succeeded. Most were caught. The punishments were harsh. Beating, mutilation in some cases. For repeat offenders, execution. The state took this seriously because the entire system depended on everyone staying in their place. If workers could simply leave when they wanted, the whole structure would collapse. So the foundation of the pyramid was bound in place, literally. And social mobility, that fundamental American ideal that anyone can rise through hard work and talent, that simply didn't exist. Oh, there were exceptions. Rare, remarkable exceptions that were so unusual they were recorded as near miracles. A commoner who caught the pharaoh's eye and rose to become an advisor. A skilled craftsman who married into a merchant family and changed his status. But these were 1 in 10,000. 1 in 100,000. For the vast majority, for 99.9% of people, your birth determined everything. Amenhotep the scribe. His son would be a scribe. His grandson would be a scribe. His great-great-great-grandson would be a scribe. Unless the family line failed. Unless something went catastrophically wrong. The position would be inherited forever. Keti the stonemason. His sons were already learning the trade. Would spend their entire lives learning it. Would pass it to their sons. An endless chain of stonemasons, stretching into an infinite future. Nefret the farmer, her children would farm that same plot of land. Her grandchildren would plow those same fields. Her descendants, 100 generations, hence, would still be there. Still working that earth. Still at the bottom of the pyramid. No ladder to climb. No path upward. Just the slow, steady rhythm of inherited position. And then there was the corvée system. This is important. This is where the not quite slaves becomes most apparent. During the inundation season, when the Nile flooded and covered the fields, farmers couldn't farm. The water was too high. The land was underwater. This was expected. Natural. Part of the annual cycle. But idle workers are wasted workers. So the state claimed them. Every able-bodied man was required to report for corvée labor. Forced labor on state projects. Building temples. Digging canals. Hauling stones for monuments. Whatever the state needed, you had no choice. This wasn't voluntary. You couldn't pay someone else to go in your place. You went, or you were punished. The work was hard, dangerous. Many died, crushed by stones, broken by the labor, killed by accidents or disease or simple exhaustion. And you weren't paid. Not really. You received rations. Yes, but only the basic minimum for survival. Bread and water. No extra compensation. No hazard pay. Just the bare minimum to keep you alive long enough to work. This happened every year. Every single year. For your entire working life. From when you were strong enough to lift stones, maybe age 15, until you were too broken to continue. Maybe age 40 if you were lucky. 25 years of forced labor during the flood season. 25 years of dangerous, back-breaking work. For no pay, with no choice. Is that freedom? Or is it slavery with extra steps? Women, we should note, had it even worse. Women in ancient Egypt had more rights than women in many ancient societies. They could own property. They could initiate divorce. They could conduct business. These things were possible. Legally. But for poor women, for women at the bottom of the pyramid, those legal rights were mostly theoretical. Nefret owns nothing. Her husband owns nothing. What would she divorce him to keep? What business would she conduct with no capital and no education? What property would she acquire with no money and no means? Her life is work. Dawn to dusk. Tending fields. Grinding grain. Making bread. Fetching water. Bearing children. Raising children. Burying children when they die, which they often do. She has no time for anything else. No energy for anything else. No resources for anything else. Her daughters will have the same life. Her granddaughters will have the same life. An endless chain of women working themselves to death to support a system that gives them almost nothing in return. This is the foundation beneath the foundation. The invisible labor that makes all other labor possible. And it's the most trapped of all. And there was actual slavery. Real slavery. No qualifications. No nuance. Prisoners of war. Captured foreigners. People conquered in Egypt's many military campaigns. They became property. They had no rights. They could be bought and sold. Their children were born into slavery. We don't know how many slaves existed in Egypt. The records are incomplete. But based on the scale of Egypt's military activities, the number of campaigns, the number of enemies conquered, we can estimate hundreds of thousands, maybe millions over the centuries. These people were at the very bottom, below the foundation, holding up everything else with no hope of ever rising even to the level of a free farmer. They're barely mentioned in the records because they didn't matter enough to record carefully. They were tools, resources, property. This is the darkest part of the sleepy structure. The part we can't soften or explain away. But even within all these restrictions, even with all these chains, something remarkable happened. The workers resisted, not with open rebellion. Usually, that would be crushed immediately and brutally, but with small acts of defiance, quiet resistance, everyday sabotage. They stole. This was so common it was almost expected. Tools from work sites, extra rations from storage, building materials that could be sold or used for personal projects. The overseers knew it happened. They couldn't stop it. It was part of the unofficial economy. They did shoddy work when they felt mistreated. When rations were late, when conditions were especially bad, they'd cut corners, hide imperfections where they wouldn't be noticed until much later. Leave deliberate flaws as a form of protest. Archaeologists have found graffiti inside pyramids and tombs. Workers wrote their names in places where they weren't supposed to, in sealed chambers where no one but them would ever see. Khamwazet was here. This stone placed by Passer. Acts of self-assertion, of claiming their work, of saying, I existed. I mattered. Remember me. They appealed to the gods for justice when earthly justice failed. Archaeologists have found prayer inscriptions, curses scratched onto pottery shards, workers asking the gods to punish unjust overseers, to bring misfortune to cruel supervisors. When you have no earthly power, you appeal to supernatural power. It's been the strategy of the powerless throughout history. Some workers ran away. We have records of runaways. Men who disappeared from their villages, from their work crews, from the system entirely. Some were caught, some weren't. Some managed to reach other provinces, take new names, start new lives. How many succeeded we'll never know. Success meant disappearing completely. But the fact that people tried, that people risked severe punishment for a chance at freedom, tells us something about the weight of the structure they were escaping. And through all of this, workers built community. This might be the most important form of resistance, the most powerful. In the worker villages, people took care of each other, shared extra food when they had it, helped neighbors in trouble, testified for each other in court, protected each other's children, mourned each other's dead. The Deir el-Medina records show constant interaction, loans between neighbors, disputes over property lines, love affairs, gossip, drama, all the messy, uncomplicated, human stuff that happens when people live close together. They weren't just workers. They were a community. And that community gave them strength. When the rations were late, they struck together. When one of their own was treated unjustly, they supported him together. When life was hard, which it always was, they endured together. This is how humans survive in rigid structures. By creating their own networks within the official hierarchy, by building their own support systems, by finding ways to be human even when the system treats them as tools. And they found meaning. This might be the most important part of all. They took pride in their work. The stonemasons knew their hieroglyphics would last forever. The farmers knew they were feeding the kingdom. The scribes knew they were preserving knowledge. Even the lowest workers knew they were contributing to something larger than themselves. This is what kept the structure stable for 3,000 years. Not just force, not just necessity, but meaning, purpose, the sense that your work mattered. Even if you didn't. The sleepy structure worked because people made it work. Because they found ways to live inside it. Because they accepted what couldn't be changed and created what they could within those constraints. Is that admirable, or is it tragic? Is it the human spirit adapting and finding dignity, or is it the human spirit broken and making the best of a bad situation? Maybe it's both. Maybe that's the complex truth. That you can have rights and still be trapped. That you can have meaning and still be exploited. That you can have community and still be suffering. That you can find dignity in work that grinds you down. That you can be both free and enslaved. Both proud and broken. Both content and desperate. The Egyptian workers lived in that contradiction. They navigated it every day. They made it work for 3,000 years. And then, eventually, it stopped working. The structure collapsed. Foreign invasions, internal decay, climate change affecting the Nile's floods, economic problems, political instability. The sleepy structure woke up, and when it did, it fell apart. But while it lasted, while it held, it was sustained not just by force, but by this complex web of rights and restrictions, resistance and accommodation, suffering and meaning. The pyramid stood on the foundation, but the foundation found ways to live under that weight, found ways to be human, found ways to push back. Just a little. Just enough. That's the truth. Complex, contradictory, uncomfortable, but true. Now let's meet them as individuals. Not as categories. Not as social classes. Not as statistics. But as people. Real people who lived and loved and struggled and died. People whose names, against all odds, somehow survived the 3,000 years between their world and ours. Because that's the thing about history. It remembers the pharaohs. It remembers the battles and the monuments and the great sweeping changes. But it usually forgets the ordinary people, the workers, the ones who actually built the civilization we study. Usually, but not always. Sometimes, a name survives, a story persists, a voice echoes across the millennia. And when that happens, when we can hear an individual worker speak to us from ancient Egypt, it changes everything. They stop being abstract. They become real. Let's start with someone extraordinary. Someone who broke the rules so completely that his story became legend. His name was Senmut. He was born around 1500 BCE to a common family. His father was a minor official. Nothing special. Low-level bureaucracy. His mother's name is lost. This was not a family of wealth or power or influence. By all the rules of the sleepy structure, Senmut should have lived and died as a minor official like his father. That was his destiny. That was his place in the pyramid. But Senmut didn't accept that. He was brilliant, ambitious, talented in ways that couldn't be ignored. He caught the attention of someone important, the most important person in Egypt. Actually, Hatshepsut, the woman who would become pharaoh. At first, Senmut was just a tutor. Hatshepsut's daughter needed education, and Senmut was qualified and available. But tutoring the royal family meant access. It meant proximity to power. And Senmut was smart enough to use that opportunity. When Hatshepsut declared herself pharaoh, she needed supporters. Needed people who were loyal to her specifically, not to the traditional power structure that wanted her gone. Senmut became one of those people. He rose. Fast. Impossibly fast. From tutor to steward of royal properties, from steward to chief architect, from architect to one of the most powerful men in Egypt. He oversaw construction of Deir el-Bahari, Hatshepsut's mortuary temple, which is still considered one of the most beautiful buildings in Egypt. Elegant colonnades rising in terraces against the cliffs. Proportions so perfect they seem almost alive. Senmut designed that. A commoner, a man who shouldn't have been anything more than a minor official. He became so powerful that he had his own tomb built. Multiple tombs. Actually, one near Hatshepsut's, which was unprecedented for someone not of royal blood. He had statues made of himself, inscriptions praising his achievements. The whispers said he was more than just Hatshepsut's advisor. The rumors suggested they were lovers, that this commoner shared the bed of the female pharaoh, that their relationship was the reason for his extraordinary rise. We'll never know if that's true. But we know he rose. We know he broke through the ceiling that should have held him down. We know he achieved the impossible. For a while, because when Hatshepsut died, everything changed. Her successor, Thutmose III, the stepson she'd kept from power for over 20 years, took his revenge. Not just on Hatshepsut, whose name and images he had erased from monuments, but on everyone associated with her. Senmut disappeared from the records. His name was chiseled out of inscriptions. His statues were defaced. His tomb was vandalized. The man who had risen so high fell even harder. We don't know how he died. We don't even know when exactly. He just vanished from history, as thoroughly as if he'd never existed. Except he did exist. We know about him because enough traces survived. Enough evidence remained. And his temple, the beautiful Deir el-Bahari, still stands. You can visit it today. You can see what he created. Senmut's story is important because it shows that social nobility, while incredibly rare, wasn't completely impossible. The structure could be broken. The ceiling could be breached. Talent and ambition and sheer determination could, in extraordinary circumstances, overcome birth. But his story also shows the price. The precariousness, the way that everything could be taken away, just as fast as it was given. Power without secure foundation. Success that depended entirely on royal favor. One person's death and you fall from the heights. He reached for the sun, and for a brief, shining moment, he touched it. Then gravity pulled him back to earth. But we remember him. 3,500 years later. We know his name. We know his story. That's a kind of immortality, even if it's not the kind he expected. Now let's meet someone completely different. Someone who never rose above his station but achieved immortality anyway. His name was Hierarchies. He lived around 1250 BCE. He was a scribe at Deir el-Medina, that worker village we've visited before. Hierarchies was not special, not brilliant like Senmut, not powerful, not influential. He was just a working scribe. Middle of the pyramid. Doing his job. Living his life. But Hierarchies did something that makes him immortal. He wrote everything down. We have his journals. Actual papyrus documents written in his own hand. Preserved by the dry Egyptian climate for over 3,000 years. And in these journals, he recorded his daily life with remarkable detail. He complained about his wife, constantly. No nachte. Her name was, and according to Hierarchies, she was difficult, demanding, and never satisfied. He wrote about their arguments, about how she nagged him, about how marriage was harder than he'd expected. He worried about money. Obsessively, he recorded every transaction, every loan, every debt. He calculated his rations and his expenses and worried that it wouldn't be enough. He gossiped about his neighbors. Who was sleeping with whom? Who owed whom money? Who got into drunken fights? The village scandal was endless, and Hierarchies documented it all with obvious relish. He was petty, judgmental, self-righteous. He criticized people behind their backs. He felt superior because he could read and write. He lorded his education over the illiterate craftsmen. In other words, he was completely, thoroughly, wonderfully human. Reading his journals is like reading someone's diary today. The same concerns, the same complaints, the same small-minded gossip and worry and everyday drama. Human nature doesn't change. Apparently, even across 3,000 years. And that's why Hierarchies matters. Not because he was special, but because he wasn't. He was ordinary. He was us. He worried about the same things we worry about. He felt the same petty emotions we feel. He lived a normal life in an ancient civilization. And he wrote it down. Not for posterity. He had no idea anyone would read these journals thousands of years later. He was just venting, just organizing his thoughts, just keeping records for his own purposes. But now, we know him. We know him better than we know most pharaohs. Actually, we know what annoyed him, what worried him, what made him laugh. We know his wife's name and his children's names and his neighbors' names. We know Hierarchies, and through him, we know what daily life was like in the middle of the pyramid. Not the grand historical events, but the real life, the mundane, boring, the human life that people actually lived. He thought he was just a scribe, just a worker, just an ordinary man living an ordinary life. But he became immortal. Not through monuments or great deeds, but through honestly recording his ordinary, complicated, very human existence. The pharaohs built pyramids to be remembered. Hierarchies just complained about his wife in his diary. Guess who we know better? Now let's meet someone less sympathetic. Someone who reminds us that not all workers were noble or dignified or admirable. Someone who was, frankly, a criminal. His name was Paneb. He was also at Deir el-Medina. working as a stonemason around the same time as Hierarchies. And he was, by all accounts, terrible. We know about Paneb because of a surviving papyrus. A complaint. A very long, very detailed complaint filed against him by his neighbors and co-workers. It lists his crimes. And the list is extensive. Paneb stole from the tombs he was building. This was the worst crime a tomb worker could commit. You were trusted with building the eternal resting place of important people. And Paneb used that trust to rob them. He took tools, materials, anything valuable. Then he sold them or used them for his own projects. He bribed officials to look the other way. Corruption was apparently not uncommon. But Paneb was brazen about it. He slept with other men's wives. Many other men's wives. The complaint lists names. It suggests that Paneb had affairs with at least 5 married women in the village. And those were just the ones people knew about. He assaulted co-workers, got into fights, used his position, because he was skilled and therefore somewhat protected, to bully others. He stole rations from the distribution, not just his extra share, but other people's shares, taking food from families who needed it. The complaint goes on and on. Pages of accusations, witness testimony, evidence. It reads like a criminal indictment, which essentially it was. Paneb was apparently talented. His work was good. That's probably why he got away with his behavior for so long. Skilled stonemasons were valuable. The overseers were willing to overlook a lot to keep production going. But eventually, it became too much. The complaint was filed. A trial was held. And based on what we know, Paneb was either executed or exiled. He disappears from the records after the trial. Why does Paneb matter? Because he shows us that workers weren't saints. The oppressed aren't automatically virtuous. Poor doesn't mean good. Being at the bottom of a hierarchy doesn't make you a hero. Paneb was a worker. Yes. But he was also a selfish, criminal, abusive person who made life worse for everyone around him. The sleepy structure contained all kinds of people, good and bad, noble and corrupt, dignified and disgraceful. It's more complicated than simple oppression narratives suggest. And there's a kind of immortality even in infamy. Paneb is remembered 3,000 years later because he was so spectacularly awful. His crimes are documented. His name survives. Is that the legacy he wanted? Probably not. But it's what he got. Finally, let's meet someone who has no name. Someone who represents millions. Someone whose story breaks your heart. In 1996, archaeologists excavating the worker cemetery at Deir el-Medina found a skeleton, a woman, aged 25 to 30 at death, buried in a simple grave with minimal goods. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that would make her stand out from the hundreds of other burials there. But modern forensic analysis revealed her story. And it's a story of hard work and harder death. Her bones showed signs of severe malnutrition as a child. She didn't get enough food during her growing years. Her adult teeth came in late and poorly formed because of dietary deficiency. She was always hungry. Her spine showed damage consistent with carrying heavy loads for years. Compressed vertebrae, worn discs, the kind of damage that causes chronic pain. She spent her life carrying things that were too heavy, working when she should have been resting. Her arms showed healed fractures. Multiple times. She broke bones and they healed crooked because there was no time for proper treatment. You don't stop working because your arm is broken. You bind it and you keep going because the work doesn't stop. Her pelvis showed evidence of multiple pregnancies. At least 4, maybe 5. Not all of them resulted in live births. Some ended in miscarriage, which you can see in the bone structure. And her pelvis also showed how she died. Complications in childbirth. Her final pregnancy, which was probably her fifth or sixth attempt, killed her. The baby's skull was too large. She labored for too long. Both mother and baby died. She was buried with care. With love? Actually, someone placed small amulets around her. A clay figurine of Taweret, the hippo goddess of childbirth, to protect her in the afterlife, since she couldn't be protected in life. Someone mourned her. Someone loved her. But we don't know her name. It wasn't recorded. She wasn't important enough to record. She was just a farmer's wife or a laborer's wife. Just one of millions of women who lived and worked and died in ancient Egypt without anyone noticing. Except we notice now. Through forensic archaeology, we can reconstruct her life. We can see her suffering. We can understand her reality. This woman carried the weight. Literally. She carried water from the well, grain to the mill, her children, when they were too small to walk, loads for her husband's work. Everything. Her back bore the physical burden of survival. She was malnourished her entire life, but still pregnant repeatedly because children were labor, were security, were the only retirement plan anyone had. She broke her bones and kept working because stopping meant starvation for her family. She died trying to bring new life into the world. Died doing what women had been dying from since humans began. Died young, in pain, having lived a life of unrelenting work. And she represents millions. Millions of women whose names are lost, who held up the foundation of the foundation, who did invisible labor that made all other labor possible, who suffered in ways that weren't even worth recording because their suffering was normal, expected, unremarkable. She matters. She matters more than many pharaohs. In a way, because she represents the truth of what most life actually was in ancient Egypt. Not golden masks and eternal glory, but hard work and pain and early death. Someone loved her enough to bury her carefully, to place protective amulets, to hope she'd rest peacefully. We can love her now too. Across the vast gulf of time, we can honor her life by remembering that she existed, by saying that she mattered, by refusing to let her be forgotten just because no one wrote her name. 4 people. 4 stories. All so different. Zenmut, who rose impossibly high and fell just as hard, who broke the rules and paid the price but left beauty behind. Kenhir Kopshef, who never rose at all but achieved immortality through honest, completely human self-documentation. Paneb, who was skilled and criminal and showed us that the oppressed aren't automatically saints, that workers could be villains too. And the unknown woman who carried everything, who gave everything, who died trying to continue life, whose name is lost but whose story we can still tell. They all lived inside the sleepy structure, all navigated its constraints, all found or failed to find meaning within it, all left traces, intentional or not, that let us see them across the millennia. And there are thousands more, tens of thousands, names scratched in tombs, records in court documents, skeletons in cemeteries, each one a person, each one a life, each one a story. Most will never know. Most are lost beyond recovery. But knowing these few, these precious few whose names or bones survived, changes how we see the whole structure. It's not abstract anymore. It's not just social systems and economic forces and historical patterns. It's people. Real people. People who laughed and cried and loved and hated and hoped and feared. People like us. Separated by time and culture and circumstance. Yes, but fundamentally the same. Fundamentally human. The sleepy structure held millions of lives. We remember a handful, but in remembering that handful, we honor all of them. We say that they mattered, that their lives had value, that they weren't just the foundation of someone else's glory. They were the point. They were the civilization. They were Egypt, not the pharaohs in their palaces, not the gold in the monuments, but the workers, the ordinary people, the ones who built it all and asked for nothing but to survive and be remembered. We remember now, and in remembering, we keep them alive. We give them the immortality they never expected, not in the field of reeds, not in the afterlife they believed in, but in our minds, in our hearts, in our understanding of what it means to be human and to struggle and to endure. Thank you, Senmut. Thank you, Hierarchies. Thank you, Paneb, even with your flaws. And thank you, unknown woman whose name we'll never know, but whose life we'll never forget. You built civilization, and we remember. So what have we learned? Walking through this invisible pyramid, what truths have we uncovered by descending down through the layers, by meeting the people who lived inside this structure, by seeing their world through their eyes? Perhaps most striking are the paradoxes, the contradictions that defined every aspect of worker life in ancient Egypt. Because nothing about this system was simple. Nothing was purely good or purely bad. Everything existed in a state of tension between opposing forces. Rights without freedom. That's the first paradox. Egyptian workers had legal protections, guaranteed rations, access to medical care, time off for festivals. These were real rights, real protections. More than workers in many societies throughout history have had. More than some workers have today. If we're being honest, but they couldn't leave their positions, couldn't change their professions, couldn't rise above their birth. They had security. Yes, but at the cost of choice. They had stability, but not liberty. Is a comfortable cage still a cage? Is security worth the price of predetermined destiny? Egypt said yes for 3,000 years. We say no. But are we sure? Really sure? Pride without power. That's the second paradox. Skilled craftsmen took genuine pride in their work. The stonemasons knew their hieroglyphics would outlast empires. The farmers knew they fed civilization. The scribes knew they preserved knowledge. This pride was real. It gave meaning to their lives. It made the work bearable. But they had no control over that work. No say in what was built or why. No ability to negotiate their conditions or improve their lot. They could take pride. Yes. But they couldn't take power. Is pride enough? Can you find dignity in work you didn't choose? Can you be satisfied with doing something well, even if you have no choice but to do it? They found ways to say yes. But the question haunts us. Meaning without choice. The third paradox. Workers found purpose in their predetermined paths. Your work mattered because it contributed to something larger. The pyramid stood. The temples rose. The civilization endured. You were part of that. Your role was essential. But you didn't choose that role? Didn't select that meaning? It was assigned to you at birth. Is meaning that's imposed still meaningful, or does meaning require choice to be authentic? Philosophy has wrestled with this question for millennia. Egypt answered pragmatically. Meaning is meaning. Purpose is purpose. Whether you chose it or inherited it doesn't change its reality. Your work matters. That's enough. Is it? Is it enough? Immortality without monuments. The fourth paradox. The pharaohs built pyramids and temples, massive stone structures designed to last forever, to proclaim their names and deeds to all future generations, and those monuments do survive. We can visit them today. But we know the workers better. Hierarchies' diary tells us more about real life than any royal inscription. The unknown woman's bones teach us more about struggle than any battle relief. The workers achieved immortality not through monuments but through traces, through records and remains, and the small things that survived. The pharaohs tried to buy eternity with stone. The workers stumbled into it through humanity. And finally, the sleepy structure itself. Rhythmic but oppressive. Predictable but imprisoning. Stable but suffocating. It worked for 3,000 years, which is longer than any other political system in human history. Longer than any empire. Longer than any dynasty. It must have been doing something right. But it worked by grinding down generations of workers, by fixing people in place, by sacrificing individual freedom for collective stability. Was that trade worth it? Egypt thought so. For 3,000 years. And then it collapsed anyway. Foreign invasions. Economic problems. Climate change affecting the Nile. The structure that seemed eternal proved temporary after all. Nothing lasts forever. Even systems that work are. Even patterns that sustain civilization for millennia. Eventually end. But while it lasted, while the sleepy structure held, it was sustained by the workers we've met. By people like Amenhotep and Katie and Nefret, by Senmut's ambition and Kenher-Kopshef's complaints and Paneb's crimes and the unknown woman's endurance, by millions whose names we'll never know but whose labor built everything. And here's the thing we need to sit with as we wind down tonight and prepare for rest. We're not so different. Our world still has pyramids, not made of stone, but of corporate hierarchies. CEOs at the top, middle management in the middle, workers at the bottom, different names, same structure. The shape persists. We still make the trade-off between security and freedom. Most people work jobs they didn't dream of as children. Most people accept positions that offer stability over fulfillment. We trade choice for certainty, adventure for safety, just like Egyptian workers did. We call it being responsible, being practical, being adult. They called it cosmic order. Same thing. Different words. We still have invisible workers. Look around your life. Who made your phone? Who sewed your clothes? Who delivered your food? Who cleaned the buildings you work in? They're there. Essential. But invisible. Just like Egyptian farmers and laborers, the pyramid is still here. We just call it something else. Labor organizing. Unions. Strikes. These aren't modern inventions. Egypt had them first. The strike of 1152 BCE showed that collective action works, that workers have leverage, that the system needs them more than they need the system. If they can only organize, we're still learning that lesson, still fighting those fights. The workers of ancient Egypt could teach us something if we'd listen. And the fundamental question they faced, we face it too. Is stable, low-wage work better than risky opportunity? Is guaranteed basic income better than the possibility of wealth? Is security worth the cost of limited mobility? Egypt said yes. America traditionally says no. But American social mobility is declining. The middle class is shrinking. More people are questioning whether the freedom to fail is really freedom at all. Maybe Egypt wasn't wrong. Just different. Just making a different choice in the eternal trade-off between stability and opportunity. Or maybe they were wrong. Maybe the cost was too high. Maybe individual freedom matters more than collective stability. Maybe the pyramid should have fallen sooner. We can't know. We can only observe that it worked. For them. For longer than anything we've built has worked for us. What did the Egyptian workers give us? What's their legacy? Beyond the monuments. First, they gave us the template for labor rights. The first strike. The first collective bargaining. The first documented proof that workers have power when they organize. Every union in history follows their example. whether they know it or not. Second, they gave us the understanding that dignity exists in common work. That building something, even if your name isn't on it, matters. That contributing to something larger than yourself gives life meaning. Not every life has to be exceptional to be valuable. Not every person has to be remembered to have mattered. The workers taught us that. Third, they gave us the long view. Structures change slowly, but they do change. The rigid hierarchy that seemed eternal did end. Nothing is permanent. Nothing is inevitable. Even the most entrenched systems can fall. If you're trapped in a structure that feels unchangeable, remember Egypt. Remember that even 3,000-year systems eventually transform. Change is slow, but it comes. Fourth, they taught us the importance of recording. Ken Herkopchef's diaries, court documents, ration lists, graffiti, small records preserved big truths. If you want to be remembered, write it down. Document your life. The mundane details matter more than we think. And finally, they gave us the rhythm itself. The sleepy structure. The understanding that there's value in routine, in predictability, in the steady breath of generations doing the same work the same way. We're so obsessed with innovation, with disruption, with changing everything all the time. But there's something to be said for rhythm, for knowing what tomorrow will bring, for being part of a pattern larger than yourself, like breathing, like heartbeat, like sleep, which brings us to why we call it the sleepy structure. Not because it's boring, though we've used that word deliberately to help you relax tonight, but because it's like sleep itself, rhythmic, cyclical, natural, necessary. Sleep isn't boring. Sleep is essential. It's the foundation of everything. Without it, nothing else functions. The body breaks down. The mind collapses. Sleep is the structure that holds life together. The workers were Egypt's sleep, the rhythm underneath everything, the foundation that made everything else possible. The pharaohs were the dreams, bright and vivid and memorable. But the workers were the sleep that made dreaming possible. And there's peace in that understanding. There's rest in accepting your role in the rhythm, in being part of something that breathes in and out, that rises and falls, that continues beyond your individual life. Wake, work, eat, sleep, repeat. Not a prison sentence, but a poem. Not suffering, but a song. The rhythm that sustains life, the seasons cycle. The Nile rises and falls. Generations follow generations. The sun crosses the sky every day. Forever. This is the sleepy structure. This is the pattern. And the workers moved through it like dancers in a choreography they didn't create, but performed with grace anyway. They worked. They rested. They woke. They slept. They lived their lives in rhythm with the universe. Until they woke up. Until some of them rebelled. Until change came. Slowly. Gradually. Inevitably. But while they slept, while they moved through the rhythm, they built civilization. They created beauty. They sustained life. They mattered. And now we wake them with our remembering, with our caring, with our gratitude. Amenhotep, teaching his son hieroglyphics by lamplight, hoping for a better future. Keti, hammer striking stone in eternal rhythm, creating beauty in darkness. Nefret, hands in soil, back to sun, children beside her, enduring because that's what you do. Senmut, reaching for the impossible and touching it briefly before falling back to earth. Kenher Kupchef, complaining about his wife and achieving immortality by accident. Paneb, flawed and criminal and very human. The unknown woman, carrying everything, giving everything, dying in the act of creation. All of them. Every worker whose name we know, and millions whose names we don't. They built the foundation. They held up the pyramid. They sustained the rhythm. For 3,000 years, they breathed in and out, woke and slept, worked and rested, generation after generation, following the pattern, keeping the structure alive. And now they rest, under desert sand, in museum cases, in our memories, in our gratitude. Let them rest. Let yourself rest. The rhythm continues. Wake, work, rest, sleep. It's still the pattern, still the structure, still the breath of civilization. You're part of it too. Your work matters. Even if no one remembers your name, your labor contributes. Even if you didn't choose it, your life has meaning, even in its routine. You're a worker too, part of the foundation, part of the rhythm, part of the eternal pattern. And that's not a burden. That's peace. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, let the rhythm carry you. Let the pattern hold you. Let the structure support you instead of constraining you. You wake. You work. You rest. You sleep. Like the Nile rising and falling. Like the seasons turning. Like the sun crossing the sky. Forever and ever. The sleepy structure. The rhythm that built civilization and sustains it still. The workers knew this. They lived it. They found peace in it. When they could, they found meaning in the pattern. You can too. Rest now. Sleep now. Let 3,000 years of rhythm lull you into peace. Let the workers' voices fade into a gentle hum. A background song. A lullaby from the ancient world. They worked so you could rest. They built so you could dream. They endured so you could be here. Now, safe and comfortable, drifting towards sleep, honor them by resting well, by accepting your own place in the pattern, by breathing in and out in rhythm with all the billions who came before. Good night. Amenhotep. Good night. Tegi. Good night. Nefret. Good night. Senmut. Good night. Kenher-Kopshef. Good night. Puneb. Good night to the woman with no name but infinite meaning. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your endurance. Thank you for building the foundation we still stand on. Rest now. Sleep now. You've earned it. For 3,000 years, you've earned it. And good night to you. Dear listener, thank you for walking with me through the invisible pyramid. Thank you for meeting these workers and honoring their lives. Thank you for remembering. Sleep well. Dream of limestone cliffs and Nile water and the endless rhythm of work and rest. Dream of hieroglyphics, carved in darkness and grain, growing in sunlight and hands that shaped stone and lives that mattered. The sleepy structure holds you now, cradles you, rocks you gently toward rest. Breathe in, breathe out, like the Nile, like the seasons, like the eternal rhythm. Wake tomorrow. If you choose, work tomorrow. If you must, but tonight, rest. Tonight, sleep. The workers would want that for you. Good night.